Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where the orchard of wisdom shows are at your fingertips. It ignites your soul, your heart, your spirit, your mind, and your body with illumination from people who have made the journey before you. They're here now to help you on your journey, on your path of self-discovery. We are funded by you, the audience, and the people we interview. If you wish to support us, please go to selfdiscoverymedia.com and press on our Fund Action button. Anything is appreciated. We'd like you to sit back and enjoy the shows. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of An Author's Kiss right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is Laurel Anne Hill. She's written a book called The Plague of Flies. She discusses the novel here with us today, and it takes us back to a time of 1846 and the western section of Mexico, Alta California, a mystical fantasy adventure. Laurel Anne will talk to us why it's important for young adult readers, teens age 14 and up, to read fiction. We can also discuss today her Mexican heritage revealed in a dark secret about her ancestors, those who were threatened to let go of their land and to make way for a new railroad. Oh my God, we see movies on it, we think it doesn't happen, but it does. She is a youth-oriented historical fantasy writer and tells the story of the 16-year-old Mexican girl, Catalina, who has to fight for her country after American invaders declare war on Mexico. Circumstances compel Catalina to protect all those that she holds dear when American invaders called the Bear Flaggers declare that Mexico, California belongs to the United States. Faced with the imprisonment and murders of her friend, Catalina relies on the guidance from people and places far more powerful than herself. Catalina risks her reputation, future, and the man she loves, and ultimately her soul to prevent the calamity that she fears. So we're going to take this wonderful journey, but she's also written another book called The Indian Woman's Light. She's received 13 awards and honors, including the Kirkus Star and the Kirkus Top 100 Indie Books recognition. And her newest book is what we're going to be talking about today. And she has a numerous amount of books there. I couldn't put them all up, but you are an avid writer, aren't you? And people don't realize that youth genre is absolutely wonderful for adults to read as well. My brother is a youth writer, and there's something about it when you read a book that's kind of geared at that age group that kind of helps build up our own intrigue and fantasy again and wonderment, which sometimes we kind of lose as we get older. So I love any form of youth writing because it takes us into a world that reminds us to have maybe a little optimism. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Really, really glad, Sarah. And I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
Youth writer, why that? I mean, I know why I like youth writing, but why did you go into that genre?
Accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my short stories are not necessarily having a youth protagonist, but my three novels are all YA. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know that my first two novels were YA until a judge of a contest told me. First of all, my first novel, which is Heroes Arise, and that was entered in a couple of contests, and it won in an honorable mention in YA. And I thought, well, that's really strange. It doesn't have a YA protagonist, but it does have a main character who's YA that we don't get to see what is inside of his head. And because we don't know that, we don't know what he's up to. He becomes a very mysterious character.
Ooh, I love mystery. And
again, go on.
No, please continue.
My second novel to be published was The Engine Woman's Light. Mm-hmm. That does have a YA protagonist, Juanita, most of the time. And I didn't know that was YA when I wrote it and had it published, because it had a fair amount of profanity,
Mhm.
and it had some, questionable sex related scenes that I wasn't sure if that could be labeled YA. And it had violence, and it had homosexuality, and it got its awards in YA. And I'm thinking,
It's right up the
boy,
youth
YA
street,
has
right up the youth
changed.
street. You're telling their story. They relate to it, right? So, yeah,
And then so this one with Plague of Flies, I just decided I give up.
yeah.
It's YA, and I'll just make it conservatively YA and still put in what I need to put in.
Mhm. I mean, if you're drawn to that kind of storytelling, then, obviously that's your forte, right? That's where it comes from. And again, as I said, people like Philip Pullman, Northern Lights, of the trilogy of that, which has been made into movies and series and things like that, the Harry Potters, all of those type of things. And as is my brother's books, when he writes about youth thing, it's seeing it from a youthful perspective. It's seeing solutions and enthusiasm that maybe as adults we've become a little bit jaded on. And it is also kind of generally always a love interest in there where they're falling in love for the first time. And I think, as I said, as we get older, we become very detached, and reading these youth orientated books could be something that can help us reconnect with our own youthfulness, help us understand the youth a lot better, but also I think give us permission to go on a journey that, as adults, we think, no, we should be reading grown-up books. Why? Because the youthful books have so much more intrigue in them, more information with them, and more reflection in them than I think sometimes the adult books have.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then, of course, I'm not sure that I've ever really grown up.
It's overrated, isn't it?
Yes. So I still remember so much about my youth. And so I can remember how I felt.
Mhm.
That's really strange. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like I thought most people forgot so much, and yet I remember so much. But then I have a lot to remember. I grew up with 3 generations living in a 2-bedroom flat in San Francisco, and my
Wow.
my father was an alcoholic.
Ugh.
And I remember my daughter complaining one time, saying she wanted a bigger bedroom. And I just laughed at her and I said, Alicia, till I was 16 years old, I didn't even have my own bed.
Right, exactly. Let's put things into perspective, things that are taken for granted by many youth. They don't, if they look at the backstory of what their parents or grandparents have gone through, I think appreciation would step in a great deal more, right? So sometimes it's good to look back to look forward, for sure. Uh, but obviously, I mean, when you're a writer, a great deal of your own experience, a great deal of your own memories, and some of it of I wish I had, or if I had taken that journey, where would I have gone? Do you find that a lot of that immerses itself into your stories?
um, yes, I take experiences too from near-death experiences.
Mm.
I heights, water, and teenage stupidity all add up to trouble.
Yes.
And my close brushes with death have been over a dozen. There's probably
Mm.
14 or 15 at least. And it mostly comes from heights, water, and stupidity.
And obviously pushing the boundaries.
Yes.
I think today we teach our kids boundaries, limitations. There's a price to pay. If you're on that boundary and you choose to go over, there'll be a price to pay. When we grew up in our generation, what boundary? You just push the limits until you found yourself, drowning, falling over, or something else happening, and then you realize, oops, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Or, at the time I was getting ready to move from the flat that I'd grown up in, and I was out on the back porch. I lived on the 3rd floor, and there was a ladder there connected to the next house, because homes in San Francisco are very close to each other. Some in some areas even share one wall. And so this didn't share one wall, but somebody had hung up a ladder, and it had been there for as long as I could remember. And I'd always wanted to climb that ladder to the next building.
And what happened?
I realized the whole thing was rotten.
Ah,
And there I am hanging 3 stories up, straight down to cement. And my mother's looking out the kitchen window doing the dishes and horrified. And
oh,
something within me said, this wasn't a good idea. And I do not know how I got my feet back on the railing.
mm.
And I got back down to the stairway. I will never know that. I just did it.
Well, that's the point, though. One's intuitive instincts step in, and there's times we have to get out of head and just go into those instincts, because those instincts will show us what we need to do. It will just do it. But sometimes if we think about it, we can put panic in the way and fear in the way, and have the inability to go and do what is needed to get out of the situation.
I think I was just too stupid to be scared, as I should have been.
Maybe just too adventurous, just too adventurous. I think, I mean, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and, the 70s was my kind of young adult time. And, it's, as I said, we were very carefree then. We kind of just, let's just try it. Let's just do it. Let's see if we can make it work. And I don't know if we were a stupid generation, but, caution, we kind of got thrown to the wind. And then you found out whether something works or not works, as you're doing it. Were we just so very carefree, or are we just so on guard today?
Well, it's a different time.
Mm-hmm.
We see so much in the little phones, on the computers. We're so connected with so much going on in the world. I mean, we didn't have a television set till I was 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
My coming of age came in the 50s. And so I couldn't even turn on the radio. The adults turned on the radio,
Mm-hmm.
and we could listen. And I was probably 10 or 11 before I turned on the radio by myself.
Oh, really?
That was just, when we want the radio on, it'll go on. And then I had an older sister too, by 4 years. And so she would do things. But we just lived in a different world. And maybe I was adventurous because I wanted to get out and do something different, to see this world.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about youth, though, isn't it? I was thinking about it yesterday, actually. If I had my youthful exuberance and energy today with what I know today, then it's limitless for where I could go. But as we get older, we get slower, in body, not necessarily in mind. We get just slower in everything, because it's like we're not going to exert ourselves to do things that are a waste of time. Right? We're going to just put our energy where we really can see some benefit. But when we're young, we're throwing that energy and that exuberance around everywhere. And we've got so much of it that we need the activity, we need the adventure, we need to explore, because otherwise we'll combust.
Yeah. I think I stopped being that way when I retired. And then I was a little bit more conservative. But even when I was working, I was in my final job, environmental health and safety professional. And so I would set up drills and training, and I would go out and inventory hazardous materials. As I laugh, I'm a former underground storage tank operator,
Wow.
which doesn't that sound better than scientist? It sounds so much more interesting. You know, anybody can be a scientist, but an underground storage tank operator. Wow.
It creates more envision, doesn't it, of what that
Yes,
really
yes.
is. Yeah. So obviously the storyteller's always been in you.
Yes, yes. I started making up stories before I could read.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I relate to that too. I was a very sickly child, so didn't have radio, didn't have TV, didn't have any stimulus, was in bed for hours and hours on end, very often on my own. And, kind of the storytelling, dimensional traveling, all of that was literally saved me because where I was cripplingly boring. So, you had to go into another world. And I think I never go to bed now without a story going on in my head. It just automatically jumps in. Right? So I think if it's there, it needs to come out in some way. But when did you become the author?
I had my first short story published when I was 11 years old
Wow.
in one of the major San Francisco newspapers at the time in the children's section.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrid. It was wretched. It was dumb. It was really lame.
But they published it.
They published it. I look back now. I mean, I was thrilled at the time.
Right.
Wow, I'm a
Yes.
published author.
Yeah.
Well, I decided that it was probably the only one submitted that week, and that's but every time I get too full of myself, I go back and read that and laugh.
But you were 11, right? So one can't compare to now.
I was 11 and much less sophisticated in so many ways than 11-year-olds today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the no TV.
Right.
We went to the movies with my mother, so she would select, of course, what we would see, and it was things she liked. So I mean, that's what I grew up liking, I guess. But totally, totally, totally
Yeah.
different.
So how did Mexico come into? Because you've written the stories about Mexico, you've obviously got a really good connection there. Is there a connection with relatives, yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. My father claimed that he was California Spanish or half California Spanish. He was a very prejudiced man in many ways. And so he never really went into his family history with me very much. And also, he had estranged himself from his family because he wanted to go to sea and be in the merchant marine when he was 16 years old. And that was not what they had in mind. And his older brother went and literally pulled him off of a boat, off of a ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 16 is a bit young.
Now, you're not going to do that. But, it wasn't so young.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kids went to work still at 14, 16,
Yes.
18.
Yeah.
And so he was really disgruntled with his family after that. I did not find out the truth of who his parents were until after he passed away. He died at age 67.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not until my 60s that I found out that no, he wasn't California Spanish. His family had come up from Mexico in the late 1850s or early 1860s. So I had thought that maybe we had, a rancho or something like that from an old
Yes.
Spanish land grant. And that maybe the reason that the family had lost the land, because that was one of the rumors that I knew from growing up, that maybe it happened in the Bear Flag Rebellion. And so I thought, well, why don't I just do a story in honor of my family? And so I was making things up. And then I discovered my great grandma Hippolyta's papers and some photos in the California Historical Society in San Francisco. And wow,
Mm-hmm.
there were things in English that I could read. And after that, I had all the Spanish translated into English so I could read it all. I got some graduate students from UC Berkeley who were adept at reading and translating old manuscripts in Spanish.
And so it became quite an eye-opener for you, what your heritage was.
Yes, yes. And I was so happy to finally, when we could have DNA tested,
Mm-hmm.
because all of my great aunt Virginia's stuff, oh, we're not indigenous, she'd just say, oh, we're not Indians, oh no, we're, we're pure Castilian, they were Mexicans with blonde hair and blue eyes and all this other stuff. Well, I'm part Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
Father was not
Mm-hmm.
pure Castilian, and neither were his ancestors.
Right. Hodgepodge. Yeah. Well,
Oh, there, Aunt
yeah.
Virginia. Oh,
Yeah. So where did the blue eyes and the blonde hair come from?
oh, and I don't even know if there was blue eyes and blonde hair, because she would just make up these tall tales.
Mm.
One of the things that we heard, oh, well, they lost the land because, oh my goodness, the railroads were going to kidnap and kill her daughters that she brought up, because she came to California as a widow with 2 young daughters, because she didn't want to go back to Spain probably. And for whatever reason, she must have not wanted to stay in Mexico.
Right.
I have no idea why.
Mm-hmm.
And so at any rate, who knows? It could have been that my great grandmother just was not good at managing money. It could have been something with the railroads. It could have been something with something else.
Yeah.
I have no idea, and I'll never find out.
I mean, the railroad story is probably quite legit because, when the railroad wanted to come through farms, you sold or else, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and they gave, very little on the dollar for your land, right?
Yeah.
And so, it was quite commonplace that, the railroaders were quite bullish. And so, I think a lot of people lost their farms or lost their livelihoods. And, if you sell or else.
And supposedly she had some prime land over in Oakland that the railroad would have wanted.
Yeah.
But still, anything that came from Aunt Virginia, I always question.
There's always a smidgen of truth, isn't there? It just might have been exaggerated,
but I don't know
right?
how much. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. So this is what kind of sparked you to do this latest one, The Plague of Flies.
yes, and then of course when I found out the truth, Catalina was already in my head.
Yeah.
He said, "You're going to do mine first,"
Yes, yes.
So when you tell a character that you're going to do their story and start to write it, you're committed. You're never going to get another good night's sleep in your life with those guys and gals talking inside of your head.
Right.
So I thought I better do it.
Right. No, I mean, I've heard that from other authors as well, is that there's a character that just, get me on paper. I'm going to plague you until you've got me on paper. I've got something to say. And pretty 99% of the authors that I interview, if it's not a biography, that it is more fantasy or fiction put together, that it is these characters just take on a life of their own. And sometimes you just feel you're a conduit for them. They've just come on out.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to tell them, no, you're not allowed to do this. I'm not putting that in.
Right, exactly. I mean, I went go back to the youth genre is everything in life has challenges. There isn't one single person that goes through life without some form of challenge. And, some of them can be very traumatic and some of them can be just hiccups or redirects, but that's what we're here for. We're here to discover how strong, how courageous, what abilities we have, and face things that we never thought we could face and do it triumphantly. And when that kind of thing is featured in a youth genre, as I said, as an adult, it's a reminder that we've got courage inside of us. But I think for any of the youth reading it, when they feel like, oh, I'm trapped, or, my parents won't let me do this, or I can't do that, and they read about a hero or heroine that is achieving all of these things, it kind of sparks inside of them that maybe not the same journey, but whatever they're going through, they can get through it and become stronger for it.
Yes, I agree with that totally. And the one thing I love about Catalina is that she's not a superhero. She's not one of these kick-ass heroines that can go do everything.
Right.
She's limited in what she can do, and also her culture limits her. And so I made her a real person, except for the magical realism fantasy that comes into the story. I made her someone who did have some problems at home. She's got a great family, but they have definite ideas of how she should do things, and their faith dictates to them, because she's Catholic, the whole family's Catholic. And so I made her as realistic as I could, to the extent that people have told me, wow, even when you've got a flying horse without any wings, I didn't bat an eye, because she believes in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think again, as adults, we restrict ourselves, the blinkers start coming in, and we stop believing in possibilities, or that, we can make things happen. And that youthful exuberance of still in that self-discovery of how far they can go, and what they can achieve, and what they can believe in, can be intoxicating. And I think it's very encouraging for youth to have that kind of image, that let's face it, Catholic and Mexican, and facing the challenges of what's around them is already marks against them. Already challenges that are there alone, never mind anything else that comes. And it's good to see characters in a book, find themselves, find their strength and their courage and their abilities, because I always say inspiration begets invitation. And when you're inspired by something, it kind of invites you to look inside and go, could I do that?
Right. And the more you read, and this is why reading is so important for teens, I think, is the more that they read, and they can read books that are fiction or books that are nonfiction. Number one, it gives them a different perspective on how other people handle things. And it's not the pablum that's fed to them on television.
Right.
It's not the shock and awe stuff that comes to them in the movies or on streaming. And what it is that you're looking at words, and you are visualizing something from words.
Yes. It's your interpretation of what you're reading, right?
Yes. And of course, if you have a visual impairment, you're listening to it, but there aren't the images there. You're hearing the words.
Right.
And then you start to interpret that, how you see it in your head. And I think that that is just so fundamental to all of us learning how to cope with situations.
Yeah. A fear on art that is being challenged. I have also on this week a gentleman who talks about the dumbest generation and what it's going to cost us in the future. And he's an English teacher. And he was saying that the political correctness, like Huckleberry Finn, you can't have your students read it anymore because the N-word is in there. So instead of addressing the N-word in the book and why it's derogatory and why it shouldn't be in there, they throw away the whole book. And
Yeah.
and that's the, you're throwing away a culture. And we need to understand why people use that word in the first place and why it's wrong today. Instead of putting a blanket all over it and going, la, 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 I don't want to know anything. And you're saying so many of the youth today are attached so much to their phones, and their talk is emoji talk. They don't even know how to put a sentence together, and they're not readers. So they're not being invited into a wonderful world of fantasy and possibilities and intrigue. And they're not learning from that. They're learning everything shallow and cryptic. And this is a danger, because books are a way of expanding the mind, the heart, and the soul. And it's essential that our kids and even our adults continue to read, because it's a way of expressing yourself, or discovering yourself, or discovering abilities that you didn't have. It's it's an education in itself, and it's one that really needs to keep on going.
Yeah, and one of the words that I had problems with as I wrote was the Spanish word, Mexican word, indio, because this is a derogatory word for Native Americans, but it would have been used. I'm careful. I think I used Indian once or twice because it was a Yankee, a guy from the United States who used that. I had to use indio at certain times, and then I would go and start to speak in terms of what tribe they
Right.
identify with. And I actually had to go and get consultation, sensitivity consultation from a Native American woman in California who's got connections to the tribes. And she went over my story and brought it to one of the tribe elders and had them look at it. And she had some suggestions to me on what I should do to make sure that I do, so it would give a comprehensive picture. And that was so, so valuable to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, there are certain words that, no, the connotation is really bad. But sometimes they're relevant in the actualization of the story you're telling, especially if it's historical. And you can't suddenly go and put in a modern word there, because it's then not going to be accurate. But there can even be a disclaimer. These words are not meant to be derogatory. They are a reflection of the history. Right. And yeah, we have to do that nowadays, because we also have to let the reader know, don't think this word is cool and you're going to start using it. Right. This is the reason why that word was bad, and why it's, not okay to say it now. But there again, that comes into when a youth reads the books, there's a lot of kind of acceptances and non-acceptances that are in there, kind of code of conduct that they pick up from reading a story like this.
Yeah, and Catalina has a discussion with her Native American grandfather. And so he gives her instructions on what he should be called. You you just refer to us as this, and so I tried my best, and I think it worked out. I think I got it. I think I got it right, or pretty darn close.
Right, exactly. And that's
That's
all
all
one
I
can
could
do.
do.
That's all one can do. And, looking at life through a 10-year-old's eyes, especially kind of the time period you were writing it, children were put out to work very quickly. They were doing chores the moment they could walk around. They weren't mummy coddled as we do today, but they were made to grow up very, very quickly. And so we look at a 10-year-old and we think, oh, what would their comprehension be? What would their abilities be? Because we're comparing it to what we think a 10-year-old can do today. And we're underselling our children, because they have an amazing amount of comprehension and abilities. Now, that doesn't mean we want to go and send our 10-year-olds out to work. No. But I also think at the same time, having open conversations, having the whole family read a book like this and going, okay, this may have been, you know, um, fact and history and fantasy put all together. But let's actually now look at the history of what really did happen and have a conversation. It's an invitation for the family to really look at what, the truth of what really went on, because if we don't do that, history is only going to get repeated.
And also too, even people of my own age who grew up in California don't really know California history necessarily, because it wasn't taught at the time. No. What we did to the Native Americans was not taught. We were always taught, that the Spanish had done some awful things.
Right.
We were okay, but we weren't okay. No. And the book An American Genocide by Benjamin Madley, which came out in 2016, I think is, if one can stomach it, it's a nonfiction book and it doesn't paint any rosy pictures. I had to put down the book sometimes and walk away. Sometimes I couldn't go back to it for a couple of days. Other times I'd come back to it later, but I had to have a glass of wine first or something, yes, before I could do it, because it goes into detail. And and
it's so horrific, isn't it? It's when you think of what humans do to each other.
The Native American population in California between 1846 and maybe about 30 years or so after, I don't remember the exact dates, went from 150,000 down to less than 17,000. And it was murder.
Yes, genocide.
Yes. Men, women, children, yes, babies on cradle boards.
Right.
Just obliterated.
I don't know if you follow Canadian news at all, but here in Canada in the last few months, there's been a huge discovery of graves, yes, out of these residential schools, as they call them, where they used to take the children away from their families, cut their hair, beat them if they spoke their own language. And, we've got to make you white. And the cruelty that they did, and the amount of bodies that they have found in hidden graves, it's just been mind-blogging. And they've been saying it for a long time. This is what's been going on, and nobody would pay attention to them until the graves started being undug. And these were Catholic-run schools. So, really? And it's deplorable. There is no excuse for it. None whatsoever. And I don't even want to hear it was the sign of the times, because it never should have happened in the first place. And if we don't pay attention to this history, if we don't talk about it, not only are we dishonoring them and everything that's ever been done to them, but we're going to keep repeating it, if not to them, to someone else, somebody else of a different color or a different ethnicity or a different something, because we've got this obsession that everybody has to be the same. And it's like America, Canada, and a few other countries in the world were entirely made up of immigrants. So we are a hodgepodge, and we need to embrace that what everybody's brought to the table, including, the natives that gracefully opened the door to us.
Yeah, and one other thing that you have to realize, that often the Spanish are put down as lazy, as stupid, as this, as that. And one thing that I find rather amusing is that in Mexican California, and Alta California was not just California as we know it. It was California, it was Utah, it was Nevada, it was part of Montana, it was part of Wyoming, it was part of New Mexico. So it was a big, huge land grab for the United States to get. But the women had rights to own property at a time women in the United States did not have property rights. And when California transitioned to being Mexican territory to a US state, that was one thing that was incorporated into the California laws, that women could own property. And that didn't come from the Yankees. That didn't come from the white people. That came from the Mexicans, especially the women.
Right. And the women are the backbone. Women are the backbone, you know. We see so many movements out there today, and a lot of the kids that are seeing that is it, you know, like, well, what's it all about? You know, a lot of the younger kids don't see difference in color or don't see what the issue is. And of course, sexism, you know, in misogyny and all of that entitlement. A lot of the young people, we hope, are too young to understand what that is about. But at the same time, they're not too young to be educated on a certain level of what it is about. Because if they know now why it's important, then they're going to grow up and be the difference that we are all seeking. So the more we can educate our kids on past mistakes, things that need to be rectified, things that are acceptable, and things that aren't, the more they're going to be the leaders in the future that are going to change all these things for the better.
Yeah, I wrote a short story that was published in Shanghai Steam. And because the editor, there's no way, I'm not part Chinese, I'm Asian. But one of the editors came to me at a panel that I was on at a science fiction fantasy convention, because it was a steampunk panel. And they invited me to write a story and submit to them. So I wrote a story, and then I ran it through one of my Chinese friends who was also an author, to have have her go through this story and make sure the right Chineseisms were there, because I didn't know,
Right.
I just did the story, and it came out really, really, really well. And I really wanted to write that story because it was so horrid what was done to the Asian population, and particularly the Chinese population.
Yes.
And that came to the United States to work on the railroads.
Right.
And that's another wretched thing.
Yes, I know. My ex-husband is Chinese. My children are mixed. And it is, I mean, everybody's looking, this is your culture, this is your identity, this is your genealogy, right? And when they come to a new country, they're going to bring their flavor, their culture, their character to merge with the culture of the country. And when we look at all those wonderful cultures that are merging together, it really becomes a beautiful smorgasbord. It really does. But when we start looking at the, one against the other, pitting one against them, one is lower than the other. One is only there to be of servants. That's when we really start going wrong. And we've been going wrong for a very, very long time. And this has to change now, because it's just simply not acceptable anymore. And there are too many children like mine that are mixed now. And they say, well, they're just not going to buy that BS.
That's right. And too, with the Chinese population, a lot of them came over to help build the railroads. They were not welcome even becoming citizens at that time.
Right.
They wanted them to be slaves on the railroads and then go back to China and leave the US alone after everything was built.
Right.
It didn't work out that way. But one of the things, of course, that China wanted is the bodies, or at least the bones, of the Chinese population who passed when they were in the United States, to be returned to China. And what the US did, they just threw them all together. They did not
no integrity, no dignity.
Back. They just threw them all together and shipped them back. And
and there are many cultures that is like where you're buried. is kind of your last essence of who you are, and to mix it with other bones is the mixing of the spirit. And there is, but when you have a culture that doesn't respect spirit, or respect anything to do other than their little narrow-minded thinking, then how can they understand? Because they've refused to open up to it. They refused to see what it means. And I think we're in awakening right now in the culture of spirituality, awakening hearts and souls into a different consciousness, which is wonderful to see. And it's happening to people that, normally in the past would have just thought it was a whole load of phooey hooey. And now they're actually opening up their minds, hearts and souls to these feelings that are inside of them that they didn't know they were always there. You've still got plenty of people that will keep those doors like an ironclad locked. But they will eventually go by the way of the dinosaurs, because we are in that awakening right now, and kind of bringing mystical and spirituality in some form into the storytelling is giving our youth, or anybody else reads it, not only an inquisitiveness as to what this is, but also a permission to embrace it.
Yeah, when Catalina in my book Plague of Flies finds out that she really is part Native American, one of her friends, who is a servant and is Native American, tells her what little that she knows that's been passed down, because she's been away from tribal life for generations. And so Catalina wonders if Coyote, who is an important spirit animal in the Native American religions, was really another saint, but the Catholic priests didn't want to tell them about.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so because she was worried, well, I'm Catholic, what'll happen if I'm asking Coyote to help me?
Right.
What will I have to burn at the stake? Because remember, the Spanish Inquisition did not end that much more before 1846.
I know. Yeah. And when we think about it, that the Catholic Church used to believe in reincarnation until they saw that people were not afraid to die, because they felt they would be reincarnated, they're going home to God. And so they put the whole fear of that this is only one life and you've got to live it by my rules or else. And there is nothing spiritual whatsoever to do with that control of that religion. And the one thing they feared about spirituality was the fact that spirituality has no containment. It has no boundaries. It is within each and every one of us and all around us in everything living. And you couldn't control that, you couldn't harness that. So you put the fear of God literally into people, then they're not going to explore other avenues. But that reign over the last, 40, 50 years has definitely been loosened.
Yeah.
And about time.
People feel what they feel, and yes. I've been spiritual most of my life.
Yeah, all my life. Yeah.
My maternal grandmother was very religious. She was a Methodist, and she instilled in me in a young age a feeling of spirituality, at least for the traditional faith. But I felt other things too. And it took me years to realize that there are other things that go on that we don't know about. Yes. I mean, and I'm a scientist, and yet I feel is that there is so much that we simply do not know.
But isn't science, this is one thing in talking to a scientist, I made a comment and he said, I've suddenly realized your spirituality is a higher frequency and vibration that we now can measure. And in that measurement, we can understand.
Yeah, and you have to remember Francis Collins, who was on the, the DNA project.
Mm-hmm.
He's a devout Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And he's both a scientist and a devout Christian. Do you know who Guy Consolmagno is?
No.
He is the fellow at the Vatican. He was a Jesuit who is in charge of the Catholic Church in outer space, I think is the easiest way to do it, you know. And so he actually goes to science fiction and fantasy conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have spoken with him, and I mean, he's just a tremendously intelligent man. And yet he has room in his
Yes.
brain and in his heart for all of these factors. And he was telling me about someone who worked for NASA who was in the space program and was a devout Christian. And so this person just firmly believed in everything in the Bible exactly as it was written.
Mm-hmm.
And even back in St. Thomas's time, in, you know, not that many hundreds of years after Christ died, there were people in the Catholic Church that were saying, well, some of this is their interpretation
Mm-hmm.
of what was going on, or it, you know, they're putting a different spin on it so
Mm-hmm.
people can understand. They're trying to relate things and compare things so that people will get an idea of from their own limited knowledge
Mm-hmm.
what was, you know, really happening. And so essentially this particular person at NASA was telling, you know, a guy called Samano about, well, this is all true and that's all true. And the Consamano realized this is a scientist. This is a rocket scientist,
Mm-hmm.
literally. And when you deal with all this stuff, you take the manuals for
Yes.
your equipment as
You
the
follow it to the
law,
letter of the
step
T.
by
Exactly.
step by step, and you
Yes.
don't change
No.
anything. And in his religion, he
Mm-hmm.
was taking the Bible as his manual of
Right.
operation,
Yeah.
step by step by step. And you don't question anything because that's not to be questioned.
Yeah.
That's your way of living life, just
Yeah.
like this is your way of going into space.
I'm a true colors coach, so the 4 key personality traits, and we would call that a green trait. And the green trait is like, I've got to see the proof. I want to know the data. And, you know, and the gold would be the operating from the manual, but it's all kind of very dry. Anything to do with trusting your instincts or intuition, or I've got feelings, is all whole load of hooey. So it's got to be, this is the blueprint, this is the manual, this is the fact, I can prove it, I can see it, I can touch it, and therefore I can do it. Which always brings to the question is, have you actually touched God as a physical person? Because you are saying that he exists because you've read it in a book, but you are against kind of the feeling and the connection with God. You've got to go for a priest, you've got to go for somebody else to reach God, where God is within you. You are a part of God, and God will speak to you, and you can speak to God at any time, but they will believe in that God, but not believe the God that's within them.
Yeah. And we have a conscience.
Mm-hmm. I wish people more had the conscience, my dear. I really do.
And I'm glad we do.
Oh gosh, yes. And that consciousness is on the rise. You know, we're waking up to realize that we have been so abusive. You know, I mean, only human beings are this cruel and abusive to each other. No other species is like this. And we're waking up to the fact that this kind of cruelty, this kind of vindictiveness, this kind of greed and control and power, and we're seeing it right now with Russia and the Ukraine. It is purely a power grab. There is no reason, no necessity, nothing. It is one person's ego of a true dictator. And people will follow blindly, and people will die for it, and people will fight for it. And it's like, have you learned nothing? And we really need to do some growing up. And I think addressing our youth, speaking to our youth, showing our youth that boundary, that conscious awakening, that ability that lies within them, the voice of God that lies within them, and to trust that voice, and to just take that with them in their growth of their own self-discovery, I think will probably be our salvation.
Yeah, and I feel the presence of certain of my relatives that are no longer with me. I've from reading Hipólito Orjundain de Medina's papers and seeing the pictures and everything. That's my great grandmother. I felt very close to her after that material was translated into English. She was a poet, and her husband was a journalist. So of course I'm a writer.
Of course. Yes. Yes, I have on my side of the family, when they actually started keeping records over 500 years ago, the family was already a big name. And they were always either judges, writers, or administrators. And, writers of storytellers have been in our family in some thread or other. And it's very interesting when you look at, past ancestral people, where you see that common denominator flowing through. And it's kind of the gene that keeps on giving, right?
Yeah, and both my maternal grandfather and my paternal grandfather, and then my no, I've got that backwards. I love the grandfathers this way. Okay, my maternal grandfather and my paternal great-great-grandfather did music, because Hipólito's husband, Emilio Medina, wrote music, he played instruments, and my mother's father, who had to go to work, by the way, at 11 years old as an apprentice machinist. My grandmother at least was allowed not to go to work until she was 12.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But then, things happen with family, people pass, and the family has to be supported. So the kids all have to go out to work. But what I was saying is that my sister grew up never learning how to read music, but she can hear music and she can sing it.
Right.
She can, and be on key.
Yeah.
And she can hear music and sit down and play it on the piano.
Right. Yeah.
Just from hearing it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. She's in tune.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yes. And that is that beautiful, that is that, that channeling, that allowing, we get so in the way of ourselves by dictating how we should do it, why we should do it, who we should do it for, who are we out to impress. And if we could let all of that go and tap into the beauty that lies within us, water it, those seeds, allow them to grow, and take the journey of that discovery, we really do discover our abilities that we never thought were there. I've literally been told all my life will not amount to anything. I hope she has just a good marriage, not at all intellectual, because from being at home sick a great deal, I never ever finished academically. And it was a write-off because I didn't fit into society's expectations. And what is success? I think success is when you find something that you feel proud of, that you feel an achievement from within yourself, that you feel is a contribution to the whole. And I think if you can do that and feel enriched and abundant because of that, that's success.
Right. I always tell myself, if one person reads something I've written and changes something they do for the better, That's
That's
that's a
the ripple
success. No
effect, right?
matter,
Yeah,
if there's only one person,
exactly.
that's
Exactly.
that's everything.
Yeah.
And that means so much to me when somebody comes up and tells
Mm,
me, Laurel, I read this thing that you wrote and I've now changed what I'm doing. I went and forgave my friend. I
right.
did this, I did that. And
I
wow.
know. It is a certain validation that what you're doing is being of service. It's not a validation of your self-value, but it is a validation of the fact that you are on the right track, that your contribution is having a positive effect. And I've been doing this nearly 10 years. I've been a spiritual counselor all my life. And I know I've saved lives in obscure ways. I couldn't tell you who they were because you're in that moment and off you go and somebody contacts you or somebody lets you know something. Um, Once this baby's out there and I've nurtured and put it out there, how people pick it up, listen to it, and what they do with it is up to them, not up to us. All we can do is put it out with goodwill and good energy and good purpose. And I think that is something that we need to let go of this. How many followers do you have? How much this? How important are you? And if we let go of that, then we truly do see the nuggets of people that are really there.
Right, right. I agree totally.
Um, I'm meant to be writing my book. I'm a storyteller in a different way. I'm a blogger, article writer, and for me, when I'm going to do my own show, sometimes I maybe just have one word, press record, and off I go, and then look at it afterwards and go, oh, okay. Um, are you a disciplined writer, or is it just something you're able to sit down and it's able to flow through you?
I don't think I have much discipline. When I have something to write, I sit down and I write it.
Yeah, you let
And
it come.
yeah, and when I have to write it too, I'll do it. I mean, I
Right.
still remember when I was working full time, and full time being in the environmental health and safety department for a 55-acre research and development site. I would sometimes work 8 hours a day. I'd sometimes work 10 hours a day. I'd sometimes work 12 hours a day. And I still remember calling up my late husband and saying, okay, send out for pizza. I'm on my way home. and and so I would write early in the morning before I went to work,
Mm,
and then late at night before I went to bed. And when I had my first novel, when I was doing that, and I wrote the first novel published because a publisher asked me to write it. And she said, you had this wonderful short story. Could you make it into a novel for me? And so I said, okay, I'll give it a whirl. And I still remember coming home from work and I was so tired. I just wanted to curl up and sleep. And all of a sudden the fax machine, and we had fax machines back then, started spitting out papers. Boom, boom, boom,
hmm
boom. You gotta correct this. You gotta fix this. Blah, 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 blah. Can you have this back to me by 10 o'clock tonight? And so I called my publisher and I said, I gotta sleep some.
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
try early in the morning, and I still have to go back to work.
You've written a lot of books, and
No, I
I,
haven't written a lot of books. I've only written 3 novels.
mhm,
All my other books are collections of short stories in
mhm,
which I've got a short story, or I have 3 books and 3 anthologies that I have nothing I've written in there but the introduction, but I was the editor-in-chief for the anthologies, which
mm,
means I helped other people rewrite their stuff.
right.
And I find that harder than just writing it yourself.
Oh God, yes, yes. I couldn't even think about that. And I'm like you that it's got to be the right moment, right time. Leave me alone. It's coming out of me,
Yeah,
and just
yeah.
let it go. And And I think if you're that kind of writer, just let it go, let it flow, and then revisit it to edit it later. Don't go back over it and go, oh no, I've got to correct that. I've got to correct this at the moment, because you can lose your flow that way, can't you? Maybe at the end of the day
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
go over, but yeah.
you can, but I don't write that way, and I never have.
How do you
I
write?
I just, I go through and I write it, and then I'll stop and think, no, I really didn't mean that,
Mm,
because what I think at the time has to progress to the next part and the next part and
mm.
the next part.
Right, exactly. There has to be some continuity.
If I let that go, then I'm gonna say, well, I gotta rewrite this whole damn book,
Right.
because it's it's all
Yeah.
wrong from there, because there might be one pivotal point that changes everything. So of course I'm very slow. I'm very fast turning out short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very slow turning out novels. And The Engine Woman's Light took me 20 years to write. Number one, I had to learn how to write a novel, which I didn't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I had to learn how to run a steam locomotive, which I didn't have a clue. And I did. I learned how to operate a steam locomotive, and I have engineered for short periods of time a steam locomotive, which I needed in order to have a point of view character that was a steam locomotive
Right.
engineer.
So you really do immerse yourself into the research. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's always something that is very connected from you and that is very real from you. You look at a lot of the superhero stories, and it's hugely fantasy, because there might be a saying here and there that is very poignant, but it's out of reach to reality. I like the stories where you feel that there is some reality in that fantasy. There is, that is possible, or could that be possible?
Mhm.
Or and I love those things that allow the question, allow you to look in, allow you to question its possibility, rather than it's so far-fetched that none of this is real, you're not connected to it. So if you've done the research enough to actually feel that there is a real connection, then you buy that connection and you really do feel it. And it almost, when you read a book like that, the characters become your friends, right? Or even you become part of the character, or become the character. You kind of immerse yourself through it. A good book is one that after you've put it down, you keep thinking about it, you keep sharing about it, because you can't help it, because the story has had such an impact on you.
Yeah, even when I wrote Heroes Arise, my first novel, which by the way took me less than a year to write. You go figure that one. And it takes place on another planet I've made up. It's a culture of lizard people, as I call them. And but there is a human uh, in there who is not a point of view character, but he's definitely a main character. And
Mhm.
he's the YA character that I keep his thoughts out of the reach of the reader,
Mm,
because it's really important that the reader does not know what he's thinking, because that's part of the drama of the entire book.
right, right. Yeah, you're
And
trying to unravel him.
even in my creatures from a different planet, I had to sit down as a scientist and say, okay, when this guy goes to battle and he's injured, what color blood does he have?
Right, yes.
Okay, it's going to be according to science what colored blood he has, because not all blood pigments could deliver what they need to deliver to an 8-foot tall guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to have a way that he could survive. How does he get energy?
Right.
Yeah, he lives in a desert. That's not going to have a lot of food. Yeah, he eats stuff in the desert. I had one thing which was equivalent of a kind of cactus thing, but not really a cactus. And that was kettle fruit. And so, but he also had photosynthetic head scales.
Mm,
So, of course, wherever you have pigmented skin, to make a culture realistic, you've got to have the creature who was born without pigmented skin. And how do they survive? Do most of them die at birth? Yeah. Do most of them die soon after birth? Yeah. But some live. And I made one woman, one female Kren, gave her a disability in that way. And at the end of the book, even though she is only referred to for most of the book, but not seen in the book for the majority of the story, she did something so smart and so brave that she, as far as I'm concerned, she stole the story.
Right. Right. Yeah. You've got me intrigued. I'm wanting to know. I was just thinking that with my brother, there's always a dog. He loves dogs. There's generally kids and dogs in his books. And in one of his last ones, it was a story in space. Basically, humans have destroyed the planet, and a whole load of these young kids are in pods going to a new planet. And there's one person that's overseeing it, and asteroid hits them and kills everything but one. And the uncle is trying to get to save her. And so he created a robotic type creature, not a dog, but as kind of the pet person, right? So it's like he couldn't have a live dog in there, but he always found the way to have that kind of companion, because the dogs are always the companions, right, that help you through things. So he's always seems to have got that theme in there. And I remember him one time trying to get this dog out of the river in one of his stories, and he said, I don't know how to get it out alive. So got so stuck in the realism of it that had to be realism, otherwise people would pick it up and go, well, that wouldn't happen. And so it is literally having to then go through all the scenarios of trying to make it happen. So I'm sure you found that a great deal, working out the scenarios, but yes, of this, but that, but is that, would they buy this, would they buy that, is that at all realistic? Do you get stuck on certain topics like that?
I have spirits,
Mm.
contact with spirits, that is important. And I have creatures in the Plague of Flies story that represent spirit animals. Because in the culture I'm writing in, the Native American culture, you've got spirits of the bones, you have spirits, your sacred animals, you have all things having some sort of spirit within them. And so my choice of having allies for Catalina sometimes are animals.
Yes. Yes.
Are animals who have spirits within them.
Yeah.
And or physical things like a river. The river has a spirit.
Oh gosh, it's a beautiful conduit, the river.
Yeah.
Awful. Yeah. Yeah. And incorporating that in, I think, again, gives whoever's reading it a different appreciation, and look at animals in a different way, even look at the water or the trees or anything else in a different way. And it's it's understanding. We've really been going along with blinkers for so long, and that take the blinkers off and see what's all around you. Everything has a signature, everything has a purpose, everything has an energy, and it's all there for you to tap into at any time if you're just willing to open up.
When I was a child, I would go down in the yard, because in the way that San Francisco is constructed, that in the main, most of the sections of town, you don't see the yards. They're all behind the houses. So you can look out in your yard and see yards from your neighbors and stuff like that. So at any rate, I used to go down and pick a flower every once in a while. And they'd be, one of the little ones, just one pansy or something like that. And my mother told me, no, you can't pick the poppies because they're the state flower and that's not legal. So I said, okay, can't pick the poppies, but she didn't say anything about pansies.
You're right.
And I'd bring it back up to upstairs and I'd put it in my dollhouse. And of course it would die.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would feel so badly that it died
Right.
and dried up. And would keep it in the dollhouse and I'd apologize to it.
Mm.
I just felt crushed that I did that. And I remember, oh my gosh, we used to get ants in the house. Unbelievable. You know, we got to chew gum and stick the gum in the holes, you know,
Yes.
when you chewed all the sugar out of the gum. And then to try and keep them out, but we would get them anyway.
Yes.
And I remember one time I was just mad, I think, and I would kill the ants, but I'd torture them first with water.
Mm.
Just feels so awful. I thought like I'd really done something bad, bad, bad. And I wonder now, I look back on that, and I was not a very empowered child in many ways, and my father was so horrid at times. And I think that was my way to take out my anger.
Yeah.
And then I felt so badly that I'd hurt something, even if
Well,
it was a creepy ant.
if you look at there's so much more violence today. There's so much more anger and there's so much more depression. And of course, the pandemic has not helped with that at all. But there's also the injustices, the cruelty, you know, what we do to each other. I mean, the pandemic brought us together and then separated us even more. And there's so much frustration out there that people don't know what to do with it. And so it becomes anger, which becomes violence, which then becomes guilt, which they want to try and hide and suppress, which they do by more violence. And so it's in within us. Every single one of us has the ability to be violent. It's just a question of how conscious are we of it. And yeah, there are some times where violence is the only answer if it comes to defense. But if we can always look for other ways to combat the situation without violence, we would be much better off.
And sometimes, you know, like the word S ... happens.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It does. And the thing is, what are you going to do about it? You know, I say when you're pointing a finger at someone, there's three pointing back at you. Okay, this is what's happening. You don't like it. What are you going to do about it? Right? You know, and of course, nature is, well, I just want to go and delete everybody. And it is, but how about you just shower them with love, loving energy, and do it often enough that eventually it will penetrate.
And I think that one of the things that I hope that people will get out of my book, Plague of Flies, is the realization that they need to love.
Yes.
Regardless of race, color, of nationality, of ethnicity, regardless of disability, regardless of opinion, that they should love other people and they need to love themselves as well.
Yes.
If you don't love and respect yourself, you have a hard time giving to someone else.
Absolutely.
You're always messed up. From
you are the peace, you are the love that you seek, right?
Yeah.
And that peace is in that love, and that self-love is letting go of other people's opinions of you and looking into yourself and seeing the light within that wants to shine bright.
And the realizations that come from reading my story, that's another thing as well. The insight into the human condition.
Yeah. I want people to read more. I want people to have a book club and discuss what they've read. I want families to read the book and then have an open conversation about it. Yeah, but this was fantasy. Yeah, but how much is it based in reality? And, you know, this is what did happen. Can we turn our backs on it? Is a reflection of what's going on today, but it's just showing up in a different way. What are we going to do about it as a family, as individuals, as a society. And if we don't have the conversation, if it's not sparked from the books that we read, then we're never going to get there. So, the beautiful thing about a book, it's your personal interpretation and connection that you have with the book. It's your relationship. But when you start talking about it with other people, you're sharing their connection, their relationship. Suddenly that book has just broadened out even more, which is beautiful with the ripple effect. I mean, again, look at Harry Potter and how many kids it got reading and the world that it opened up. And that was, I mean, I know the church tried to ban it, some people, witchcraft and all of that type of thing. I was the nerd in the family. I'm the one that read all the books. Get your own dinner. I'm reading this book and watched all the movies and everything else because I love fantasy. I see so much reality in fantasy, but I also see a reality that I want to see in fantasy rather than the reality that's here.
And the author of the Harry Potter is a Christian. And she
Right.
had a very Christian message in that
Yeah.
shows up.
Yeah. And fundamentally,
Yeah, and she had it in mind for the
Mhm.
series.
And right at the end when it's with the Voldemort, I feel sorry for you because you'll never have love. And that was his weapon, was love. He was loved. And in that love that he was loved, he could defeat Voldemort because Voldemort would never know love. So love is a way, it is the true triumph in life. And when we step into love of self, of life, of our meaningful purpose, of our contribution, then we actually really start to hear the music of the universe.
That makes me think of the old saying, the music of the spheres. Do you know where that comes from?
No, I don't think so.
There was a scientific belief at one time, which from or philosophical, I should say, because they weren't really into real science back then, as it can't be compared to today, that the space is full.
Yes.
The space is full. And that's how you could have the music of the spheres, because the space was full of something.
Yeah.
Everything was connected in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. We've done a numerous amount of shows on music, on tonage, on sound, and how important it is to our very psyche, and how it governs a great deal of how we think and feel and heal and stand up. So, music, storytelling is never going to go away. Music's never going to go away. It's all a form of storytelling. And we learn from that storytelling. We're hungry for those stories. We're hungry for those answers in those stories, things that we could apply to our own lives, that are going to elevate us up to another level, because that's what a story does.
And the music is so important too, because we use a different part of our brain to process music than our regular thoughts, our regular memories. And so this is why, oh golly, when I was in college, I discovered this. I had to learn all these chemical formulas, and I had to actually start with one electron and build the cholesterol molecule out of it on paper. And everything was stick figures then. They didn't have any software. They didn't have any computers other than ones that possibly took up an entire building. And so I would just start with one electron, and I was trying to draw this all out in paper, knowing I'd have to do it on a test. And so I learned it to music. I learned every transaction where, a carbon molecule came in, or this molecule, or an enzyme, or whatever, to music. and I learned it to a piece that had been by Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass.
Mm-hmm.
So when everybody's sitting down in class and they're being asked the question, which we knew we were going to get asked, I'm there humming to myself. Got it right. It was
Yeah.
flawless.
Yes. It's the rhythm of life. Everything is a rhythm. Everything is a frequency, right?
And so, how did you do that, Laurel? I just studied and learned it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. There's been, wonderful discoveries on water and the energy in there and what we feed. We're 70% water. So, what we feed ourselves is how our water is going to nourish us, but also on the various sounds and how it has an effect on our psyche and depression and uplifting us. And there's just color, even the chakra foods. If we're craving a particular color food, that means that that particular chakra is really needing more fortification. And there's so many things that it's constantly telling us that we need to use in order to enhance our lives or sustain our lives, that we've just got to, again, no box. What box? There's no box. You just got to be willing to absorb the knowledge that is around you, and you will understand it when you start using it. You don't all have to be a scientist to understand it. It's just understanding it, use it, and then you will understand why.
Mm-hmm. Go for the feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you must be kinesthetic like me. And for me, it's about feel your thoughts, don't think them. Where I know for many people, it's think your thoughts. And I find if I think my thoughts, I'm just going to go around like a treadmill, a hamster on a treadmill. Yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. And I say, sit on your butt. That's the only thing you need to do with that. And if I can't feel the connection, and if my feeling doesn't come into a vision of understanding, then my thoughts aren't going to make sense.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I work at doing is getting my thoughts onto paper through words. And I'm most happy, even if I get one word right, one sentence, one paragraph, that I've gotten it so that it works. It conveys a feeling that is a believable sentence, a believable paragraph, a believable page.
A connective one, right? Where people really connect to it.
Everything has to be connected throughout the book so that things work.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes I laugh that, well, yeah, writing the first draft takes a long time, but writing the subsequent drafts become just as hard because you've got to start making sure they all link up and whatever, and this and that. I found with Plague of Flies, I started writing that to honor my Mexican ancestors.
Right.
I finished it to honor my late husband because we worked on that story together. We went places together. We did research together. And it was a part of us together. And I just realized that a couple of weeks ago when I was answering some questions an interviewer wanted. And I said, oh my gosh, the reason that it took me 13 years to write the first draft of the first half of the story and the first draft of the second half of the story only took me 3 months. Is that because with the distraught feeling, the loss, the pain that I went through, I could more identify with the pain Catalina was going through.
Right.
And when I did that, I could finish her story because I knew exactly what she felt like.
Yes. Yes.
And I couldn't quite touch it before.
No, you had to identify with it.
That I lost the most important thing in my life. And I
How long were
watched
you
him.
married?
We were married 42 years, and I
Mm.
knew him for 7, 8 years beforehand.
So you had half a century together.
Yeah.
How beautiful.
Yeah.
What a gift in itself. It truly is. You know, we all hope that we have that kind of relationship in life. And actually, very few of us are truly blessed with that. But to have that, and yes, the loss is hard because it is most of your life. You know, you've been the duo, and to kind of come out of that as well, it's just me now, but it's just you with him as your shadow, him in your ear, him kind of egging you along, because you can always feel them, you can always kind
Yes.
of see them, can't you? So yeah, it's you alone physically, but that essence of who they are is always with you, and if you're willing to, it will always guide you forward.
And then strange things happen because I'm a strange person.
No,
And
no,
it's
no, you're not.
and you say,
No,
yeah,
you,
well,
you're
maybe
just,
he's not so maybe he's not so far away.
you know, and
Yeah.
they say earthly person, a worldly person, a spiritual person. I think you're all three. So, you know, you're a connected person. And so with that
I've
connection,
got
things
to
are going to
tell you
happen.
the clock story. I
Oh, yeah.
have to tell you the clock
We'll
story.
finish off with the clock story.
Okay. And that is when my grandmother passed away. She was 100. And I had gone out and I bought her a baby bin alarm clock that, wound up.
Mm-hmm.
And so then eventually it broke and I brought her another one and I took the old one home. And so the old one didn't really work right. So I just sat it by my bed, didn't wind it, it just sat there for a few years. Then I had this horrible illness and I was just so distraught. I thought I was going to be an invalid in my bed for the rest of my life. I'd never be able to write. I'd never be able to do this. And in my deepest moment of despair, the clock, which didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't wound for 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
started ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And I
It's her
said,
egging you on.
and the reason this is significant was in the engine woman's light, one of the spirits hides in a clock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I thought, okay, that's the way, then it stopped, never worked again.
Right.
Now, my husband used to be in charge of the alarm clock because he was on his side of the bed. And at night, he'd move the little lever that would project the time onto the ceiling. And in the morning, he'd turn it off. And I found that I even had a hard time moving the thing. So I didn't. I just never touched it because it was hard for me to pull this up and down, and it kind of jammed. So I didn't use it. Okay, so then I'm sleeping in his medical chair at night now because I have acid reflux and I don't want to end up with esophageal cancer like he did.
Mm.
So I wake up in the morning and the clock's on. The clock light is on. And this happens more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened on our anniversary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, the body may no longer be here, but the essence and the energy is. And they will stay around you and they'll find any way they can to connect with you and connect with you in a way that you identify it's them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just, it's not weird, it's not anything. No, it's just them connecting. And just through those little symbols of what they do, it opens up into an enormous connection of you're still with me. I feel fortified. I feel covered, yeah.
And I have a
It's,
whole list of things I could talk about.
yeah,
It's
and I've got a few of those as well, but it's,
and it's related to David and that we were just so much part of each other. And yeah.
a wonderful gift to have, definitely. I have to say I envy you. I do. I've never known that kind of love. Would like to, but never have. So yes, truly a gift in itself. But my dear, how do people get hold of your books? How do they get hold of you? And what's next for you?
You can go to my website to find out about them, which is laurelannehill.com, and Anne has an E at the end, okay? They can go to Amazon. They can go to the Barnes & Noble online. If they want an autographed copy, they can contact Borderlands Books in San Francisco, which is a science fiction fantasy store, and say they want an autographed copy and buy it through them. And I will go in and sign it, and Borderlands will ship it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm going to spell the name for people who are just listening. It's Laurel, Laurel, Anne, Hill, HILL.com. And you go by Laurel Anne Hill on the Plague of Flies on Amazon. I do have the link right here. You're on Facebook, Laurel Anne Hill as well. And, you know, this is, yeah, I always say to people, buying other people books is a great gift. It's a gift that keeps on giving. And we don't have to wait for Christmas or birthdays. You know, we can just pick up a book and say, you know, I just thought about you, and hand over a book. You know, my kids aren't the kind of spasmodic readers. And I bought my son a book a couple of years ago that he's kind of reading. He's running his own business and everything else. So yeah, he doesn't have that much time. But every time he picks up, he gets lost in it. And, you know, my brother is the author, so I love reading his books. And when he's in the process of writing them, he sends me, which I've got for this weekend, juicy few chapters to read on his next chapter there. And I love seeing the process of it. Because, you know, I know the mechanics. He once talked himself into he got himself thrown into a pit, and it took him a week to come out of it, to write himself out of it. Because
okay. The character got thrown into a pit.
Yeah,
he did.
No, well, the character was kind of based on him because it was about a ghostwriter, but he got thrown into a pit, and it took him a week to write himself out of that pit, because it's like, you know, every time I go up, the rubble pushes me back in, and it, you know, he sometimes gets kind of stuck in that, but that's also what makes it so utterly real. Because, you know, it's the actual steps in getting out of it, instead of all of a sudden he just sprung and leaped out of it like a Superman, you know. So it's and you never know the things that they survive. You never know if it's going to be what somebody might go through in life, and because they read for it in the book, they knew what to do.
And number one, don't panic.
Oh, panic blocks
blocks
the oxygen, blocks the brain from working. It sends off a smell and an aura of panic and fear out to everything out there. So take the deep breaths, a few deep breaths, and then allow yourself to think and feel at the same time, right?
Unless you're drowning, then it might not be a good idea.
Exactly. Take a few deep breaths.
Unless you picture your head is above water.
Right. In that case, lie on your back and get your bum up. Right. So float. We've all got an answer for something. Thank you so much for sharing here today. It's been an utter delight. I've truly loved your story and your, you know, the whole journey of it here. And I love the way you've taken reality, kind of realism and fantasy, and put it all together. And, you know, that, you know, I like the stories that make you come away and go, that may have been fantasy, but it felt so real. And that reality is something that really then I think has to start looking at our own parallel lives, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing and for writing the books. And is there another one coming out in the future?
Well, I just started working on one, so it'll be a few years at the rate I'm going, but I better hurry up because I'll be dead before it's written if I don't.
Well, what do you say? Your mum went to 100, so I think you've got quite a few years ahead of you.
That was my grandma.
Oh, your grandma. Right.
My mother only lasted till 80, and I'm almost there.
Right, well, you've got a good 20 years left. I live with an 88-and-a-half-year-old who's got more energy and stamina than I do. So, you know, never say never, right? So I look forward to the next book. All right, folks.
I look forward to it too. And thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time with me today.
Oh, no, this has been delicious. It has been delightful. Thank you. You've shared so much and so many different nuances of what make you up and what's in the story. So it makes the book even more intriguing to want to read. And, you know, you've put your lifelong story and intrigue in there, which I love, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing. And thank you. So folks, remember, a good book isn't just a good book and you put it down and you forget about it. It stays with you and you want to share it with others and you want the conversation and you refer back to it. And it's there in your mind at a time like, what would so-and-so do during this? So read the story of Catalina, part fact, part fiction, part fantasy, but a whole lot of reality in there. So until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. Please tune in to our selfdiscoverymedia.com/shows and you will see all the other genres that we have from you. Every week on Tuesday, we bring you new shows from illuminating people. If you know someone that should be interviewed, please contact us at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com. Now stay tuned for your next show.